Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Zero Summit, where, as we have learned over the last day or in the morning or so, we're looking at innovation and information leading humanity to a better and more sustainable future. But the other thing that I think you can learn more broadly from the sports industry is how visible leadership and collaboration can really drive change. And I'm excited to say we have some very interesting panelists here to bring these topics to you today. I'll be your moderator today. I'm Aileen McManamon of 5T Sports Group, and we've been working actually since 2008, helping the sports industry navigate this sustainability pathway. But at this moment, I'd like to introduce another OG in this industry, actually a bigger OG than me, founding director of Sport and Sustainability International, our host today, Dr. Alan Hershkowitz, to tell us a little bit more about Sport and Sustainability International.
Yeah, thank you. And hello to everybody out there. I hope everybody watching this broadcast is healthy. It's been a very challenging year and a year and a half for all of us all over the world. All of us have been challenged in our lives, but this circumstance with the pandemic is definitely unique. None of us have been untouched. So I do wish everybody watching this good health and continued good health. Sports and Sustainability International was an outgrowth of work that actually started in North America in 2004, 2005. When a few of us began to develop environmental programs with Major League Baseball and the National Basketball Association and Major League Soccer and the U.S. Tennis Association, National Hockey League. By 2007, 2008, we had every professional sports league develop a sustainability program. In fact, this is the cover of Sports Illustrated from March 2007, which is showing information about climate change in sports. By 2010, 2011, those of us working with those leagues created something called the Green Sports Alliance, which became a coalition of sports and leagues throughout North America. And then in about 2015, 2016, I reached out to some friends in Switzerland, in France, in the UK, and we wanted to create a Green Sports Alliance internationally, but for various reasons, we wound up calling it Sport and Sustainability International. And the term sport and sustainability is important to remember because it's not just about sustainable sports, it's about using sports to advance sustainability in all the communities in which sports teams and venues are hosted. Anne-Cécile and I and a few others in 2017, hosted by the International Olympic Committee, formally created Sport and Sustainability International. And basically its mission is to promote climate literacy, to promote environmental literacy, to basically use the platform of sport. In the United States, less than 20% of people follow science, and about 80% follow sports. So if you want to educate people or change behavior, you have to tap into trusted networks. So the premise of SandSI, Sport and Sustainability International, is to tap into the enormous cultural and market influence and legitimacy of sport to promote ecologically intelligent practices. And I'm honored to be one of the founders of that organization.
Thank you so much for that, Alan. And in fact, I think the real coming together for SandSI began in earnest at COP21, if I'm correct. And we just recently, of course, are all coming off of COP26, the Zero Summit, following very quickly getting people into action and conversation following COP26, which didn't escape, I think, anybody's view at this time around. I think we've gone through quite a few COPs that people didn't pay attention to, but I think the whole world was watching. And I, for one, was very excited to see that initial work from COP21 really be built on at COP26, where over 25 sport-themed events took place. Some speaking, but a lot of action as well happening there. So among those, at the top end, and we'll talk a little bit about this as we go in, the UNFCCC, or the United Nations Framework on Climate Change Convention, or Convention on Climate Change, I always get that mixed up, put a little bit more oomph into the Sport for Climate Action initiative, with commitments to have emissions by 2030 and go to net zero by 2040. We'll get into that a little bit more. We had athletes stepping up on multiple fronts, eco-athletes with a manifesto now signed by well over 300 athletes globally. Protect Our Winters, of course. Many surfing and sailing organizations who have been at the vanguard of this for decades or more. And also Champions for the Earth releasing a very powerful video together with the IOC, which if you haven't seen, we'll make sure that gets into the chat for this session so that you can watch that. We also saw Next Gen leadership stepping up with students, hackathons, ideas, getting to know the people who are working in this space and realizing their voices. And we saw industry stepping up through a Sport by SDG workshop that encouraged campaign development, the Golf Environment Organization, and of course, an organization that people at the Zero Summit know quite well, Formula E, and Envision Racing, stepping up with some really fantastic exhibits, including cars that were manufactured from schools' litter pickup. Amazing stuff. But I want to say we're really focused on talking about action. And so without further ado, I want to now have our speakers introduce themselves, who are bringing a very rich and broad background to this topic. So if we could, please, Ingrid, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Thank you. Thank you for those words of introduction, and greetings to all who are listening to this session. My name is Ingrid Beutler, an international lawyer, and I've been the last 5 years with the International Olympic Committee. And then just this year on World Tourism Day, we launched a new nonprofit organization, the Sustainable Mountain Alliance. So we're focusing on the transition of the sport and tourism industries to become more sustainable. Obviously, the mountain environment is an incredibly unique environment. It provides nearly half of the world's population with fresh water. And many refer to the climate change crisis as also a water crisis that we're not fully aware of and conscious of yet. So I hope that this hour of discussion will give you some maybe ideas, solutions. Often the sports environment is an opportunity for businesses, for sponsors to showcase what works, what doesn't work. Most of us, we love sport, and through our efforts, we really hope to be able to support those mountain communities around the world, and particularly mountain sports. Thank you, Aileen.
Thank you so much, Ingrid. And I'm going to toss over to Anne-Cécile Turner of The Shift.
Yes, thank you so much. And I think the name of our newly created company says it all. You know, The Shift is really what we need. So we've created with 3 others, partners in crime, The Shift in February. We will almost celebrate 1 year soon, last year. And before that, I accumulate more than, I was counting, 25 years of experience in the worlds of sports, media, sports event organizer, communication, and sustainability. So one of the big role I have as well through The Shift is I'm the sustainability director of the ocean race, around the world sailing race that was previously called Volvo Ocean Race. So I have a good knowledge of the water-based sport, and more specifically sailing. And I'm also a board member of Sports and Sustainability International.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Anne-Cécile. And of course, Alan, while you've told us a bit about SandSI, please do share with us a bit of your background.
Well, I'm environmental scientist. I've been doing environmental research and advocacy for almost 40 years, believe it or not. That's for me, believe it or not. Yeah, I came to this work not as I like sports, but basically I started collaborating with sports in 2003, 2004, when in the United States we were dealing with national political administrations that were trying to take the scientific consensus, the scientific knowledge around climate disruption and challenge its legitimacy. And the question was, how do we counter the what we call bully pulpit, the platform of the White House? At that time, we had George Bush as president, and he was trying to downplay the legitimacy of climate science. So by working, I approached the commissioner of Major League Baseball and the commissioner of the NBA and Major League Soccer, and worked with Billie Jean King and others to basically use the messaging platform of sport to communicate, to promote climate literacy and environmental literacy. But I am a scientist, I'm an environmental scientist, and I use various tools to try to advance sustainability. And let me also remind everybody who's listening to this, and including my esteemed colleagues, and I am really honored. By the way, Ingrid just climbed Mount Kilimanjaro, which is pretty amazing. And Anne-Cécile is probably, I think, the most effective oceans advocate when it comes to sustainability that in the sports sector in the world. So it really is a tremendous honor for me to be with these spectacular people on this. But I do have to say that, while sport has embraced the concept of sustainability, and remember, Sustainable Development Goal number 1 is no poverty. Sustainable Development Goal number 2 is no hunger. Number 3 is good health. And we have become very aware that planetary health is dependent on economic health. If we don't have the resources, the financial resources to make investments into new technologies, we're not going to be able to deal with planetary health. And economic health is dependent on human health. We know that from the pandemic. So, and of course, human health is dependent on planetary health, because the pandemic was instigated by ecological misbehavior, the wildlife trade, deforestation, climate change, all of that contributes to the proliferation of infectious diseases. So I come at this work as a scientist using sports as a platform to, basically, educate mostly the supply chain. The impacts at any particular sporting event are not insignificant, but they pale in comparison to the upstream impacts of the plastics industry, of the paper industry, of the chemical industry, of the textile industry, of the transportation industry. So it's really, how do we change production? 95% of a product's impacts happen before you open the package. And sport can help send a non-political message to the marketplace about the need to make investments into ecologically intelligent practices. So that's the direction I come from it. I do love sports. I mean, I love going to sporting events, but I really came to the sports platform. I also work with the film industry, and I also work with the music industry, because probably the single most important thing that we could do to advance sustainability, probably the most important thing we could do to deal with climate is change cultural attitudes, change cultural expectations about how do we relate to the planet. How should we relate to the ecosystems that give us clean water to drink? How should we relate to the ecosystems that give us clean air? I mean, we treat the atmosphere like a sewer. We're pumping over 110 million tons of global warming pollution into the atmosphere every day. And basically every water body on Earth is contaminated with pollutants and also absorbing a lot of carbon. So we have a lot of work to do. And the fact that the sports industry has embraced sustainability as a message is enormously influential. However, as Aileen said at the beginning of this conversation, what really matters is what is happening on the ground. I think we're all familiar with Greta Thunberg's very famous speech titled "Blah Blah Blah," which is, okay, we get it, we understand it. We could use the words crisis, disruption, emergency, but at the end of the day, we have to change the production process and we have to change consumption patterns.
Well, thank you, Alan. That is a great segue into where I'd like us to start. And I think maybe I'll throw this one to Anne-Cécile to start. So we know that sports is a very competitive industry. And when we get down to the ground or the water. So, you know, who is, let's say, moving well beyond blah, 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 and actually very aggressively reducing their footprint in this space? Who's winning right now in this? Well, let's say not winning, but who's really moving the ball forward, or the boat that we can look to?
We have something in our teams, you know, to say the sustainability is not a competitive sport, and it cannot be, because you know, we are far from winning the race today. And on top of that, we need a collaborative approach to make sure that we are creating, you know, positive impact at scale and at speed. So of course, you have some best practice, and you have some sports that are more impacted by than others. But you know, I was thinking about, you know, the global sports events that have to move, you know, material and people all over the world, that have the biggest impact. I was thinking about, you know, golf, who has big water issue, for example. Obviously, Formula One, you know, is one that has, you know, also not only an impact but also reputation challenges. Football, you know, mass participation, and also, you know, other impacts that are more maybe linked to attitudes, behavior on the fields, you know, and there we don't want to only think, I know the summit is called Zero around climate issues, but we surely do not want to separate social issues and environmental issues. So I think we really need to think about, you know, the objective to reduce is also, I guess we're going to go to the solutions later, but we need, you know, people as well on this road. So of course, I'm gonna quote sailing as one of the best practice and a leading sport in sustainability, simply because first it's a sport, you know, it's the ultimate symbol of sustainable mobility. If you can go around the world over a period of 9 months, you know, without fossil fuel, almost without fossil fuel, powered by the wind and by the knowledge of the people about their environment, about how the currents are working, how the wind is working, able to, you know, use weather patterns to win the race, you know, on the water. I think that's a good example. Of course, sailing has a lot to do, and you know, at the Ocean Race, for example, we've initiated sustainable boat building innovation workshops, because our boats still have progress to make on composite material, end of life, energy on board, you know. But there's a lot lot of work being done at the moment on reducing the impact of the sport, and making sure that when we don't know how to do, we create a collaborative response. So yeah, I could go on forever.
Well, I certainly, you know, in my observation, can attest to the leadership role that sailing has played. And certainly, I think we see that mirrored across in other sports, where the sport is very, very intimately connected to nature. So I think that's a logical place for us to invite your comments in, Ingrid.
Thank you,
with
Aileen.
the Sustainable Mountain Alliance.
It's exactly, and that's precisely what we're seeking to do, to learn effectively what sailing has done, and to transpose the good practice to the mountain environment. I think that the people, the athletes, those who participate in sports that are closer to nature are often more conscious of the responsibility that they have, and they're often closer to nature. So they're often leaders within their community in creating the change. Anne-Cécile mentioned that it's not a race, and the race to zero, you know, the good practice initiatives, I think the positive message that we have today is that most of the large sports have recognized the importance of the environment, of their responsibilities towards their communities when they're having events. So there's many, and most of the sports organizations are seeking to reduce their carbon footprint. Even if we look at the Olympic Games, so a massive mega event, FIFA World Cup, and then you have the local smaller events. We're working with, mountain biking, it might be mountain climbing, it might be trail running, it might be ski events, and they're all. And then we think, why is that movement? There's the public pressure, there's the sponsor pressure, there's legal requirements now. We are now obliged to often measure. Some of the countries now, there's a legal obligation. And so it's been clearly, there's this movement now, sponsors are no longer going to be supporting event, which is clearly disrespectful of the environment. So I think there's many opportunities and strategies that have been identified to really reduce the footprint reduction. The biggest challenge that we can see amongst sports is the air travel, the fact, especially of international events. So focusing more on the quality, even rather than the quantity of the events. Even, this conference today, we're speaking to you and we're situated all around the globe. It's because of the pandemic, because of this health situation, but it's also now making us reflect on our carbon footprint, which is also a positive evolution. And then there's many solutions. We'll be focusing on that later on, but thinking of what are the low emission travel options that are out there, is it electric powered buses and cars, etc. And those sorts of solutions that they can apply whether we work in sport or otherwise. But it's quite unique because the sport, it can showcase what works. Thank you, Aileen.
Yeah, indeed.
I think
it's interesting that you've brought up the pressure that's coming from not just sponsors or commercial partners, but also from the public. And certainly, Alan, you're a good one to speak to the trajectory of what you've seen there, because you've been working at this for quite some time with a number of organizations who, stepped in to work on these things. But I think now because they've stepped in earlier and with your guidance, are in a position to really lead and in a position to respond to those public pressures. As we know, in the last year, Nielsen had a report that said properties with a sustainability agenda can expect an 11% revenue bump over the next 3 to 4 years. So what's your perspective on that, Alan, in terms of the companies and organizations and sports properties you're working with and how they're stepping into leadership?
Yeah, well, look, this used to be sustainability, climate action used to be seen as the right thing to do, and it certainly is the right thing to do, but it is no longer being driven because it's just the right thing to do. Increasingly, I think, as Ingrid and Anne-Cécile pointed out, you've got government regulations that are asking for information about climate impacts. You've got investors who do not want to be investing in companies that might give them a branding liability. And to your point about fans, we did a survey, actually, I think it was now well over 10 years ago, where about 75% of all sports fans indicated that they felt that their local sport team did have a responsibility to be ecologically responsible. I think what Anne-Cécile and Ingrid mentioned, some of the things they mentioned, is really important for people to remember. They were pointing out various small initiatives. And when it's small, I mean, it's not a small thing to change the composites used to make a sailboat, a competitive sailboat. But the point is that there is no one big single answer to the ecological challenges that we face. Certainly no one big single answer to the climate problem. And this is important for viewers to remember, because there is nothing too small to matter. Everything matters. In fact, the work that I started back in 2003 and 2004 with US football started with toilet paper, because toilet paper, bathroom tissue was being made and used at sports venues. It was coming from some of the most ecologically rare forests in the world were being cut down to make bathroom tissue, which is used for just a few seconds. Also, the forestry sector, the paper industry, is one of the largest instigators of global warming pollution. The release of emissions from soil, of course, the destruction of carbon sinks through cutting down trees. So it's important to remember that there's nothing, everything is helpful. I am working now with one of the most famous sports organizations in the world on their plastic straws. The plastics industry is 99% dependent on petroleum and gas. The impacts of the plastics industry on climate, if right now the plastics industry is projected to increase fourfold. In fact, we talk about plastics use reduction, but as we speak right now, the trend is going in the other direction. Actually, there is more plastic demand, more plastic production. And within the next 25 years or so, the plastics industry can actually consume 15% of the total global carbon budget of the planet. And we're talking about ketchup bags or straws or things that we use once and throw away. So every little thing matters when it comes to dealing with this issue. Also, most sports fans do not watch sports at the event. They watch it through some type of electronic media. So we have an additional challenge. I mean, we do education at the venue, and we also, promote. This is why eco-athletes is so important, because outside of the family, the most influential role models are athletes. A study was done in the UK that determined outside of the family, the most influential role models were athletes and entertainers in that order. So using culturally significant, culturally influential role models to promote climate literacy and environmentally good behavior is important. But let me say that, let me just remind everybody, the barriers to sustainability are enormous. We have literally trillions of dollars of embedded industrial infrastructure that is being subsidized by governments to do ecologically bad things. I worked with the OECD in 2002. We produced a report called Environmentally Harmful Subsidies that showed 4% of the total gross domestic product of the planet was going to support environmentally harmful activities. So there's a lot of barriers that we have to overcome. And those of us who are on this panel really need to modify or emphasize our language to acknowledge the good work that has been going on. I mean, the fact that every sports venue has a sustainability program is wonderful. But as Anne-Cécile knows, because she and I work on the UNFCCC steering committee together, the UN did a survey of the signatories to the Sport for Climate Action Framework, and we discovered that more than half of the signatories to the UNFCCC Sport for Climate Action Framework were themselves not yet measuring their greenhouse gases. And measurement is fundamental to all of our work.
And I wanted
Sorry,
to,
Anne-Cécile, did you want to jump in there?
Yeah, I wanted to jump in there because I couldn't agree more, Aileen, on the every little action matters. And not only because, it has an impact on the environment. We were talking a lot about beach cleaning in our space around plastic pollution. But we also need, and it's mattering because of the impact, but also because of the awareness it's creating. So if you think about your single-use plastic usage, every day as a citizen, as a voter, as a consumer, then it's creating momentum. But that's, I think, it's the end of the scale, and so many and so often and too many times the attention is diverted to the small issues, and we really need to measure well, as Alan is saying, to go at where are the bigger impacts, and suddenly when you measure, when you realize, the impact we are creating globally, sometimes it's an overwhelming journey, and I encourage everyone to share that, because we're all in the same boat in a way. Overwhelming because it's way beyond our shoulders, but together I think that's where we really can make things change. And the reason why I'm saying that is because it's not only about individual actions, is a systemic change that needs to happen. The reality, if we're facing the reality, we're not going to make it, on time to reach those very high-level ambitious targets. If we don't come up collectively to create a real solution on the system. And it's a massive challenge, it's super ambitious, but it's also a way to create innovation, to create new stories, to create value, to create purpose and inspiration for us and generations to come. So that's why we need the young ones with us. We need super powerful education programs. We need to grab the low-hanging fruits out there, but we need to think ahead long-term with a great long-term vision to make sure that, we are collectively rethinking the whole system.
Sorry, can we just grab Ingrid? I think you had something to add in there.
No, it's fine. I'll just reiterate what my fellow panelists have said. It can be overwhelming almost, the challenge before us. And it's the fact that we are maybe all experts in a small domain. And I think there's no other sector, or we need to work together. And I think it's across sectors, between sport and even Alan's first initial remarks on, you're working with producers, you're working with transport, food, waste, water, the whole remit of society, which is why as sport, it's so incredibly interesting to test effectively and showcase solutions, and realizing that the athletes and all of us have role models from whichever country we're from. We have at the table here, we're, French, Swiss, New Zealander based in Switzerland. We've got the US, Canada.
An American in Canada.
It's really, we all have the role of the athletes to create the behavioral change, which in a positive way, and to make the small steps, take the small things. It might be changing the light bulbs to put in LED light bulbs. It might be taking the bus or taking your bike to work, and others see you as as leaders within your societies and your companies. It's those sorts of small steps that can then create the behavioral change. But please, Alan.
Yeah.
Excuse me.
So there's what happens in sport, but there's also this notion of the climate shadow, right? The influence, the where it can be, and that's what we're here for today. Really, is to put this fine point on. Yes, if you look at any individual stadium, of course, there's things that they can do. When you look in the broader scope, as Alan's pointed out to us, what an individual stadium, even 100,000 seat stadium, won't have that much influence. But of course, if an entire league of stadiums, if an entire federation, if in the case of IOC, showing some leadership here about saying, no, this is the way forward. So let's talk about where we see the way forward.
Can I ask a question? Mm-hmm. I want to just follow up on something Anne-Cécile said, and I want to ask Anne-Cécile and Ingrid, and just for our viewers, just so everybody knows that Aileen is in Canada, and Ingrid and Anne-Cécile are in Europe, and I'm in the United States. So Anne-Cécile said something really fundamental, which is that we need systemic change. So it's about, we definitely, every little thing matters, but fundamentally, we need big picture systemic change. So my question to my family here is this, because I just know in the United States, sports does a lot of political things, but mostly it has to do with them getting tax breaks or some types of economic incentives out of government. We do not see sports in the United States as being big advocates for climate action when it comes to government policy. And I'm wondering, Anne-Cécile and Ingrid and Aileen, you in Canada, what is your experience in the EU or in Canada? Do sports federations or teams engage to encourage the kind of systemic regulatory work that is necessary to supplement the market-based work? Is that happening?
Yes, 100%. Sorry, I'll just take on that one. I've been working for the last 20 years with the international sports federations, many years working with the United Nations, including when Kofi Annan was appointed as first special advisor on sport. So when really sport is a political tool, there is a very close collaboration now between governments, between regulators, between the UN entities and sport. It's no longer, and also the reality is most of the international sports federations, including the International Olympic Committee, they are non-profit associations, which obviously brings into questions about governance. That's not the topic of today, but no, we can be reassured that there's this very close collaboration, which is why, as the legal frameworks are there, the regulatory frameworks are there, there's this push now from the governments. If you're going to host a World Cup, a World Championships in my country, it has to be in accordance with what the people expect, in the democratic countries particularly, which is why there's a lot of refusal, because they're not meeting the expectations of society now. So yes, we can be reassured they're not being moved so much by the market forces. And Cécile.
Thank you.
Yeah, and I see that more on the, let's say, private sector or business angle, and I think fossil fuel industry would be very difficult now to appear as a major sponsor, in non-traditional sports and everywhere really, simply because the population now is putting pressure, on the major actors to go far beyond what has been promised so far. So I remember first the discussion we had when we were creating SandSI, and you said fossil fuel industry is not allowed, and it was in the States at the time, and I thought at the time, wow, that's great, that's forward thinking, and now it's getting traction, and it's not necessarily because there is a regulation in place in our sports. But for example, some partners would not allow another in the contract. It would be said, I don't want to be associated with any kind of fossil fuel industry, and that's enough. Then it's the end of the discussion.
Yeah, and now it's not only the fossil fuel industry. I'm seeing increasing, at least in North America, increasing embrace. I was going to say, I don't want to sound political, but increasing embrace of cryptocurrency, which is a gigantic energy problem. One Bitcoin requires enough energy to that 30,000 homes, US homes, would consume in a year just to make one Bitcoin. And we're in like the Staples Center in Los Angeles that hosts the Los Angeles Lakers and other sports teams is now changing its name to crypto.com. I know that there are some other major sports leagues. I can't name them because I can't name them. I'm not allowed to name them right now, but they are actually changing their naming rights to cryptocurrency sponsors. And the ecological impacts of crypto are enormous. So these sponsors are being embraced without an evaluation of their ecological impacts and the messaging there. So again, sports has been doing a spectacular amount of great work in promoting education on this issue, but at the same time, we still have a lot of sponsorships, at least in North America. I don't know how it is in the EU. If you could stop fossil fuel companies from sponsoring or being prominent at sporting events, God bless you, but it's really hard to do here in the United States.
Yeah. Well, I think, we certainly are seeing some disturbing developments, but on the other hand, I think we are also seeing the rubber band snap back much more quickly in some cases. For instance, if you look to the UK and the betting companies that were, of course, signed all over the place on shirts, jerseys, what some of those companies then found, was there's a lot of new entrants in that space, and not all of them are going to be very solvent. So I think we're getting some good educational lessons out of that a sport property may want to look a little bit more carefully at who they're signing with to ensure that sponsor themselves is sustainable. But also, again, as we referred to earlier, we're seeing that public pressure, that says, we're not completely comfortable with that. So we're getting closer to our time for this session, and I want to be sure that for the broad audience that we have here today, coming from so many different sectors, from mobility, from energy, from construction, from water and other infrastructure resources, from finance as well, that we give them some of our better examples to take away, some concrete examples where they can go and do a little bit of a deep dive. So maybe to kick us off there, I want to bring up one, actually two, one that our audience can relate to that's not climate, but it is human health oriented and a great example of how sport can influence. And I know that this came out of a club in Brazil where there was a fantastic campaign to encourage people to become organ donors. I don't know if any of the three of you saw that. I would encourage you to go and look that up. But I know for our audience here, when we talk about things that can influence in that systemic change, we know that campaign had a phenomenal effect, partially because it was brought forward in a very positive light, showing their fans that, my heart is always with this club. And I do apologize to our audience that I can't recall the name of the club offhand, but I do know it was a Brazilian club. Our heart is always with this club. And when I die, my heart will continue to beat for this club, just somewhere else. It was a very lovely campaign. But one of the other ones that I think we see a lot of fun and excitement and positivity around is the Waste Management Phoenix Open, a golf tournament that brings in over 800,000 people over the course of 5 days and is zero waste, zero water, net zero energy. I think it's become net positive on a few fronts, but really engaging people with these topics in a very positive, lighthearted way. And I'm wondering if any of you might want to bring forward some examples where you've seen a club doing something phenomenal with energy, water, or waste, and putting that out there to like a beacon for others to kind of have a look at and join in on.
Well, the first proposal we made for measurement, the first proposal we made when we created the environmental programs at sports leagues and teams in North America was measure. Measure your energy use, measure your greenhouse gases, measure your waste generation, measure your water use. Measurement is fundamental. We measure what matters. And to your point about other issues like, I would also say gender equality, gender bias. We know that we can never solve the climate problem unless we address the gender issue. More than 60% of all the food grown in the world is grown by women farmers, but they are the ones who get the least technical and economic resources when financial resources are allocated after a climate disaster. Women farmers get less support than agribusiness or male farmers. And of course, when there is dislocation due to climate catastrophes, women are the most vulnerable population and often have to carry most of the burden of the transport of the family. So to your point about, whether you're talking about organ transplant, transplants or poverty alleviation or good health, I would also say that really all of these issues, you see the 17 Sustainable Development Goals, number 13 is climate action. That doesn't mean it's the 13 most important. We know that. It's, arguably the most important. But all the other Sustainable Development Goals, like good health, like decent housing, like ending gender bias, like ending poverty, like ending hunger, all of this is related. And that's why Anne-Cécile and I and Ingrid, why we use the term sport and sustainability international. Because sustainability is much bigger than any one issue like climate and much bigger than any one sector like sports.
So, Anne-Cécile, I think this speaks to some of the work that you've done with now the Around the World race, former Volvo Ocean race, in terms of outreach and engagement.
Yeah, and I think the one message that is super important to share as well is the fact that we should not only concentrate on putting our own house in order, whatever organization you're working for, but you need to realize that you have a voice, you yourself, your organization, and this voice, that's where it matters, as an advocacy platform for all the topics we're talking about. If you're credible and authentic and want to reduce your impact and improve others, that's where it counts. And one example I have with the ocean race that was called the Volvo Ocean Race last time. It's a round the world professional sailing race going into 10 host cities around the world. And we went to Brazil. And one of the best quotes I have from the last edition of the race last time is we stopped in Itajaí in Brazil. And it's coming from someone working for the mayor of Itajaí. And he said, the Volvo Ocean Race has changed the life of Itajaí and its citizens forever. Since the passage of the ocean race, and we were really focusing on ocean health targeting plastic pollution, the city has launched an ocean summit, has invested millions of dollars in a waste management facility, has created a 1 week worth of gathering collective ideas, has influenced the city and its rivers and all the villages up the river, touching more than 700,000 people. So it's like a movement we've created, and it's really where the power of sport is not only, powerful, influential, but very, very efficient on land, to create change.
Fantastic. Well, Ingrid, I'm sure over your many years of experience with the IOC, you've seen some similar things. That's really a fantastic story. And Cecile, right? It's that domino effect, right? One interaction, and then it lights and changes things for decades and maybe even longer to come if we're around. So Ingrid, please. I'm sure you have wonderful examples. Hard to choose one.
There's hundreds of examples, I think, in every country and city. It's just recognizing that we all have a role to play, whether we're in the private sector, whether we're working for a little NGO. I love the example, you have an organ donor campaign. It might be a campaign, so raising awareness about a particular issue that's important to your local community, where you can see you can make a big difference, a big change. And I think, and now increasingly, we think every private sector company now has a CSR department, most of them. It's very, very rare that we, come across one that doesn't. And it's making those connections, those collaborations. Anne-Cécile's given a wonderful example. I think of the Olympic Games, we had waste treatment plants that were, built specifically for the city, but used for the games. You had cleanups of riverbeds. We had, there were so many wonderful examples of change because of the games. Yes, there are negative impacts. It's massive, the impact of a major event. So personally, I prefer to give examples of, my local mountain bike club, where we have those annual cleanup days, or the ski club at the end of the season. You get all the clubs and their families, and everyone walks through the mountains and you clean up the waste. Just small initiatives. But I think really reiterating, as these closing times, it's the importance of measuring things as well. Yeah. Very impacted, we have to realize the importance of the water issue, the carbon issue, the waste issues, and to measure that as well. Once you measure, then you know where and how you can reduce. And then, then we're looking at opportunities for regeneration, for really giving back, doing better, restoring, renewing the systems that we're working in.
And one last thing to add to what Ingrid is saying, because of course we're aligned. Our visions are, thank God our visions are aligned and we're all looking in the same direction, is exactly as you said, Ingrid, is like we need to realize that, the net zero is not good enough now. We need to go beyond that. We need to create the positive impact. We need to regenerate our ecosystems. We need to restore our people as well, in their confidence, in their ability to really act. We need to refocus and add purpose in everybody's lives, in our big entertainment world, where suddenly entertainment matters more than anything else. We've lost the capacity to produce, to understand what we're producing, to know where it goes. So we really need to change the focus and create the system that we have created that is damaging so much, has creating so much impact. So,
we're just coming up to our last few minutes here. And I think this helps tie things quite nicely together for the audience that we have with us today. One of the things you'd mentioned CSR, and of course now we're seeing ESG is the new CSR, which I personally like quite a bit better for a number of reasons, as Alan alluded to the Sustainable Development Goals, and I'm of course wearing my pin, I always do. But we're getting a better picture of this interconnectedness. And what we're also seeing with ESG metrics, as that's being imposed on corporations, many of whom are in our audience, they're looking to measure their impact on these fronts. And certainly one of the things that they can do if they're partnered with sports is help sports measure that as well. We've talked about it again and again, and we know from your work with UNFCCC and the new commitments that are out there, as well as just general pressures, that measurement must happen, and that impact and advancing progress must be measured. But I think we also see these opportunities for these organizations to get involved, as Ingrid's pointed out, even at the local level. Are you involved? Sure, you're in your corporate seat during the day, but what are you doing after hours and on the weekend? What's your engagement with sport? Where could you take what you do from 9 to 5 into your community? Where can you bring those skills and abilities and knowledge into the broader community to take effect? So one of the other things that I think we want to leave people with is, so that's a little empowerment to our audience. But I'd like to ask each of you to leave us with a bit of a call to action, hopefully in a very empowering and positive vein. What is your call to action, either for our sector or for the broader community and audience here today, about taking action from here forward? We're in the decade of action after all.
Measure is number one, because you cannot document progress without understanding your baseline impacts. Identify opportunities for reduction based on your measurement, and then also identify opportunities for replacement of fossil fuels with renewables. And then I'll say the last thing is sustainability, as my colleagues have pointed out, has evolved into ESG, environment, social governance, and ESG has now evolved into DEI, which is diversity, equity, and inclusion. So because we understand that social injustice is not only a consequence of bad environmental policy, but it is actually an accelerator of bad environmental policy. So I would say, diversity, equity, inclusion, measurement, reduction, and get out of fossil fuels.
All right. Anne-Cécile?
Yeah, along those lines, I would say, first you need to understand the measure, but I would say focus really on the reduction. Reduction is the most difficult, but the most powerful. So, once you measure, what do you do with the figures? That's helping you. But the reduction exercise, so collaborate, share best practice, look outside, look in other industries, create bridges, fight the siloism that we are suffering from, which is a systemic inheritance and legacy that we need to fight against. And maybe most importantly, use your voice.
Use your voice. I like it. Ingrid?
Yeah, to replicate what my colleagues have said, the measure, the reduce, really focus on that. I would add regeneration as well, really seeing where you can restore and renew to regenerate what effectively we have destroyed. And we're conscious now, we know what we've destroyed, so now we have to restore those ecosystems. We have to look after, the communities that we're working with, and really just to look outside our borders and our boundaries and our sectors to look for the innovative solutions. It's all about collaboration. It might be a solution that's been developed here in Switzerland that can apply in Brazil, and it's really to establish those bridges across sectors. Thank you.
Oh, fantastic words to leave us on, all of you. Thank you so much, Ingrid Beutler from Sustainable Mountain Alliance, Dr. Alan Hershkowitz of Sport and Sustainability International, and Anne-Cécile Turner of The Shift. On behalf of 5T Sports, I'm Aileen McManamon, and thank you again for joining us today.
Thank you.
Bye. Bye.